everyone. This is Bruno Andrade, Public Relations Coordinator for the IATEFL Young Learners and Teenagers Special Interest Group. And this is our first interview in a series of interviews that we'll be interviewing young learners and teenagers specialists during this pandemic lockdown. And my first interview is James Taylor. James Taylor is a teacher, materials writer, project manager, podcast producer. He's a man of many things, many projects, and he's done beautiful things. And I've worked with him, so I can say that he's a great, great professional. Welcome, James.
Hi, Bruno. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. You're right. Master, was it Jack of all trades? Master of none? I don't know. But it's lovely to be here. Thank you. And I'm very honored. I'm very honored to be the first. So thank you very much.
That's a very good attitude for you. So James, recently you've collaborated in a playbook for emergency remote teaching for young learners and teenagers. And I want to know what platforms and minimum technological requirements do the young learners and teenagers teachers need for this time of emergency English teaching?
Yeah, sure, of course. So yeah, we published this playbook. It's the mastermind of Claire Venables, who brought us together. And I was one of the contributors to this, talking about the technology aspect of it. And I think what's been very interesting in the last couple of months with this situation, which has been created by this pandemic of sort of forcing teachers to start teaching online, that people who hadn't really considered it much before. And so I think that there's been completely understandably a lot of panic, really, in different degrees, depending on how competent and comfortable the teacher is with online tools. Whether they've taught online or not before is one thing, but just generally how they feel about technology is another thing, right? So there are teachers who have never taught online before, but they feel kind of comfortable with tech, and so they've taken to it quite quickly. But not everyone is in that same situation. And then, of course, when you talk about young learner teachers, you're talking about maybe teachers who often don't have the same amount of training as some other teachers. I know it's a generalization, but it's often true. And also, you know, it's perhaps the hardest kind of teaching to just switch to very quickly, right? To be teaching young learners with you know, older teens and adults. They're a lot more understanding of the situation, and they, of course, they have their own technical competencies that they can bring to the whole situation. But when you're teaching young learners, they can't bring that. So many of them can't bring that, the younger ones especially. So it's a really difficult situation. So I think that's the first thing we need to say before we talk about anything else, is that we have to put it in this context, which is to say that the reason we call this a playbook for emergency remote teaching as opposed to online teaching is because it's an emergency. It's not normal online teaching. Online teaching is not is a very well researched area. Syllabus and curriculum are developed over a long time.
There's a lot of planning and structure.
All of these things, right? So whereas here it's just been like, go, you know, in a couple of weeks you're teaching online now, and it doesn't mean that teachers haven't had any training, but compared to what you would normally expect to get if you were teaching an online course, it doesn't compare. So we think that we have to call it emergency remote teaching because it's a different situation and different things are happening, and with the accent, of course, on the emergency aspect. So that's a very long-winded way of getting around to answering your question, which is to say, but I think that context is really, really important to understand when we talk about this, because if you're an experienced online teacher, then the things I'm going to mention now will just are very basic. But if you're not an experienced online teacher, then these are things which you may not have even really thought about before. So understandably, the first thing that people were thinking about when it came to teaching online was, what platform am I going to use? What's my classroom going to be? What space? Now, for many teachers, this may not have been a decision that they've had a part of. They may have just been told you're using Zoom, you're using Microsoft Teams, whatever it is. And so for many teachers, they've just been like told to do what they have to do. So I think for most people, you just have to get on with whatever you've been given. But what I think is really important, and I think that if you haven't had this training from your institution, and what you need to take upon it yourself is to really train yourself in understanding the platform and the strengths and the weaknesses and how it can be used. And what's particularly important is understanding the settings for this platform. Because obviously with younger learners, the safety aspect is crucial, is absolutely crucial. So we really have to make sure we go in and have a look around at the settings. And then of course there are settings which are important because it's young learners. So you want to make sure you try and manage some aspects of their interactions that you wouldn't have to do if you're teaching older learners. So that's the first thing I would suggest. I'm not going to recommend a particular platform. I have my own feelings about that, but I think that in reality, most teachers don't have a choice anyway. The important point is understand what you can do with that platform and understand the settings.
Nice. And you also mentioned something about safety aspect, James. It's very important that young learners and teenagers, teachers think about safeguarding, because the internet is a world full of possibilities. And this might turn against us teachers when we use technology in our lessons. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects to that I think is interesting. The first thing, when you talk about all the different possibilities, to remember is the fact that many, one problem is the fact that many teachers might feel overwhelmed by the possibilities. There are so many things that you can do now because you can go online, that I think that there can be this kind of feeling where there's the sort of overwhelmed by choice feeling, like, or should I be using this app, and should I be using this website, and should I be using this? And the first thing I would say was just keep it really simple for you and for the learners. Like, don't overwhelm them with options. Keep it as simple as you possibly can. And then when you become more comfortable and they become more comfortable, you can build on that. But start with the real basics, and don't be scared of being analog. You know, I have this whiteboard behind me here for a reason. I use this in my online lessons because it works. There's no point using a digital version if that works. So that's the first aspect. And then related to safety, of course, safety is absolutely crucial. And I think it's about respecting the rights of your learners. There's more detail about this in the playbook that I would recommend that people go and have a look at. But you have to respect their rights to privacy, to how their data is used. These are important considerations to think about. So again, it's about doing a bit of research, finding out what the situation is, and just keeping that in mind, being respectful. I mean, just simple things like not sharing screenshots on social media and stuff like that is a simple place to start. Definitely.
Yeah. And some people don't even know about that, right? They don't do it by on purpose. They just don't know about safeguarding for children. Well, James, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. Lovely chatting with you. This was Bruno Andrade, Public Relations Coordinator for the Young Learners and Teenagers Special Interest Group, interviewing James Taylor. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Bruno. My pleasure.